pours. When it rains, it pours. I covered the story of President Trump's speech that he delivered on January 6th in Washington, D.C., just in the Capitol before the march happened, which was then deemed the insurrection by the left, and how the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, one of the largest media organizations or news organizations in the world, actually deceitfully and dishonestly altered that video to make it seem as if President Trump said something that he did not say. And it now turns out that the BBC is actually not the only media organization that did this. What we've learned now, according to the reporting that has been done by the Telegraph, which is also another British news organization, that two other media organizations that we know of dishonestly altered Trump's speech to make it seem as if he instigated the so-called insurrection on January 6th. The first of these that did this was the Australian, the ABC, which is a publicly owned media organization in Australia and is known for its liberal bias. And I follow the Australian media landscape quite a bit. I normally watch Sky News Australia. They are a much better news organization. They are conservative and stuff. But I've always known that, obviously, that the ABC, the Australian ABC, is a liberal media organization. But I didn't realize how bad their bias was, to the point that they would dishonestly and fraudulently edit someone's speech because they disagree with his politics to make it seem to their audience that he said something that he did not say. This is incredible, actually. And it's also compounded by the fact that they are always blaming Trump of threatening media freedom and all of that bullshit. But while they continue to show themselves to be actually bad actors and malign actors, it is actually quite incredible. And the second media organization that deceitfully edited Trump's speech that he delivered on January 6th is the state-owned Swedish media company called, what is it called now? SVT. I mean, obviously, no surprise here. Sweden and all those Scandinavian nations, they are the hotbed of leftism. Like, those nations are like leftist lunatics of note. But one would never imagine that, especially a state-owned media company in Sweden, would deceitfully edit President Trump's words to make them seem as if he was inciting violence on January 6th, which obviously happened 4 years ago now, or something. 5 years ago. It is incredible, folks. It is incredible. Because, I mean, I think if we were to do a analysis of media that has covered this January 6th event, especially the European media houses, it's likely that we'll find that every single one of them, in some way, in some one fashion, way or the other, have done some dishonest editing to make it seem as if Trump said something that he did not say. And when it comes to the BBC in particular, because this story came from the BBC when the Director General of the BBC resigned, and then the CEO of the news division also resigned because of that documentary where we found out that they edited Trump's speech. It turns out that they also ran that same edited clip on another news segment, on a Newsnight segment. And there was a guest on that particular night who pointed out to the fact that the speech that they played is not the speech that Trump made, that it is edited. And it turns out that actually the BBC ignored these warnings, and now we've been reliably told that the BBC, the following day after it ran this on the Newsnight segment, had an editorial meeting in which this issue of their edited video of Trump's edited speech was discussed, and that the bosses there at BBC dismissed these concerns. So when it comes to the BBC, at least they cannot claim that this was like an error in judgment, because now we have evidence of internal communication where some lower staffers in the BBC warned them that the speech they are airing of President Trump is actually not the accurate speech, and that they dismissed it. Why would they dismiss it? Well, of course, we know why they'll dismiss it, because they are biased. They are biased because they were trying to influence public opinion to make it seem as if President Trump in 2021, January 6th, instigated and incited violence. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was intentional. This was intentional, and this was malicious, at least on the side of the BBC. Because now we have two incidences when it comes to the BBC, and we have one incident on the BBC where we've been reliably told that they were warned that what they are airing is actually not what he said, and then they just dismissed it. So, because in terms of libel laws and defamation laws in the United States, you need to actually show evidence of malice. It's not enough that someone misrepresented your words or your actions. You actually have to show evidence of malice. And on the side of BBC, evidence of malice, malicious actions is actually quite evident. The fact that they dismissed the warnings that they received after a Newsnight segment of when they aired this clip with the edited Trump speech, and they just dismissed it, is evidence of malice. So if I were Trump or I was advising him as his legal team, I would actually go forward with a lawsuit against the BBC in particular. Because there's enough, and especially when you are suing someone in this particular instance, you have power for discovery, which means that you can compel them to hand all internal documentation relating this sort of broadcasting of this particular segment. Because it is in those documents where we would see who warned them not to air this clip because it's edited and who said no. Because that's exactly the evidence of malice that is needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's been defamed. But for me, what is absolutely shocking, I mean, obviously, I know that the ABC, the Australian ABC, is a liberal. I mean, it's leftist. And I mean, when we talk about the Swedish state broadcaster, I would assume that it's leftist, because Sweden is a leftist nation. Any of those Scandinavian nations, obviously, are leftist nations. But I didn't realize the level in which Western media in the past couple of years have been lying to their audiences about President Trump. I know that like leftist media in the US lies routinely and repeatedly about who President Trump is. But I didn't realize the extent to which European media, Australian media is also lying about him. It is not surprising that the view that people have across the world is so negative, because we have all these Western media houses lying about him, presenting him in the worst possible light. It is actually astonishing. And when it comes to the BBC in particular, the BBC is one of the largest news organizations in the world. They have almost global like coverage. In Africa, for instance, they are in every country. Like in terms of when it comes to Western media organizations, the BBC is the largest in Africa. Someone could say the same about the BBC in South America as well. The BBC is very big. And for a long time, the BBC was highly regarded and very and highly trusted. But I noticed their liberal bias a couple of years ago, and so I mean, like liberal bias in British media, for instance, is just it's insane. Whether it's the BBC or Sky News or the Guardian or any of them, it's incredible. It's incredible. And so, what I would like to know, they need to investigate DW, for instance, and they need to investigate some of these French media organizations and find out in terms of what did they tell their audiences about Trump when it comes to this particular event. And for me, what astonishes me the most is that these people say Trump threatens media freedom, Trump hates the media, Trump this, Trump that. But time after time, we see evidence of these people trying to destroy him. 95% or more of negative coverage, often and repeatedly lying about him. Like I think the media in Europe, especially in Europe, it's the absolute pits in like when it comes to the media in Europe. I remember during the the Brexit the Brexit situation, you would never find a single of these largest like European media organizations that covered Brexit in a way that is balanced and fair. Not a single one of them. Whether it be France 24 or DW for for um for Germany or BBC or Sky News, you would not find a single European like news organization that covered the Brexit fairly. It was all like left leaning. And whenever they're covering the Brexit position, it will be slander, caricatures, pejoratives, all kinds of, to the point where it's like, who are these people? Making it seem as if the people who wanted to leave the European Union are these racist, backward people who don't love, who don't want people of color and all that bullshit. I really think that people who live in Europe need to do something about the media organizations that provide them news, because the situation is bad. At least in Australia, you have Sky News Australia, which happens to be conservative, which is basically the counter of the propaganda that comes out of the Australian ABC. You need that. And even in the United States of America, the media was like 99% liberal until Fox News was established in 1996. If the media was fair and balanced, there wouldn't have been a need for Fox News to be launched in 1996. But the media was so biased against conservatives that it was only rational that hear news in a manner that lying about them and calling them racist and calling them all kinds of names. But now I think in the US now we have a larger ecosystem in terms of the conservative ecosystem. You have Fox News, you have Newsmax, you have um, uh, many others now. Like it's a lot better than it was. But the media landscape still leans liberal. When you're looking in terms of in Europe in particular, there are certain countries in Europe that don't even have a single news organization, whether on TV or on radio, that reports the news, even in a slightly conservative leaning fashion. Every single one of them are not just slightly liberal, they are leftist. They are outright leftist. It's actually quite insane. Yeah, yeah. So, but like, yeah, this particular situation for me has really made me realize the work that needs to be done to rebalance the scale when it comes to media coverage. Like, things are bad, man. Like, things are horrible. Like, and I'd say that Trump must sue them all, sue them for their last dime. and all of them have been exposed for what they are, which is biased. Incredible, man. Cheers.